Chapter 28. Harpy-town. Harpy-town was located on the easternmost side of the city. It occupied the area between the inner and outer walls of the city and between the southeast and easternmost entrances. Reyes followed Gagara through the city towards their goal. The closer to the east he got, the more wretched the types of housing the elves seemed to be forced to live in. It was almost as if there was a sense of decay around the whole of Harpy-town, with the street that stood just the other side of the inner wall being the most wretched of all. It stank. It stank worse than the street Reyes had been forced to walk along with all the crows' cages. The houses also seemed to be a lot more run down here. It was hard to believe that anyone could live in worse squalor than those that shared their street with the dead, and yet here he was. Some of the buildings were made of little more than planks of wood and thin sheets of metal that had been put loosely together. The locals watched every step Reyes took, as if they would like to kill him, but not one of them raised so much as a finger against him. It was as if the entire population of the street was sufficiently cowed as to be no real threat. "There are 3 gates into Harpy-town, handsome," Gagara told him. She landed beside him. "You can use any of them, but you will be safer if you use the southernmost one. However, I think it would be good for you to come to the top of the wall first and get some idea of the layout of the town." The inner wall had been built with the defence of the city in mind. At regular intervals along its length were towers that were in easy bow range of each other. There were also steps leading up to the top of the wall all along the street, so that elven soldiers could respond to the call of arms and reinforce those defending the wall within seconds. Feeling out of breath, and with his feet trying to insist he stop and rest, Reyes found the nearest of these steps and began the long, strenuous climb to the top of the wall. It was a tall wall. There were more than 3 times the steps to the top of this wall than there had been getting to the battlements of Castle Damoth. The makeshift houses of the elves in this slum of a street were left long behind before he had even climbed a sixth of the way to the top. Gagara sat at the top of the wall, resting between 2 crenellations of the battlements, with her legs dangling over the side. She looked round at Reyes as he came over to join her, and smiled at him. Reyes couldn't get enough of that face, the cute smile she gave him. He had only known Gagara for a few short hours, and yet he was already thinking that he was in love with her. She was a harpy, but Reyes was also a harpy, and such love no longer seemed quite as perverse to him as it had. It was a thick wall. It was at least 12 feet thick from the top of the steps to the crenellations on the other side of the ramparts. Each crenellation was large enough to hide a man totally during battle. Every 20 or so feet a ballista stood ready. None of them were loaded, but it looked as if they were all kept in good working order. Reyes and Gagara weren't the only ones on top of the wall. Less than 100 yards to the left of where they sat, Reyes could see another harpy, and a few more beyond her. Reyes wasn't sure what that harpy was doing at first. She seemed to be leaning over at a weird angle, right on the edge overlooking the elven street below. Then he realised what was happening. She was relieving herself on the elves. She's... Reyes stuttered. "Peeing on the elves," Gagara replied, looking to see what Reyes was looking at. "Yes, but surely..." Reyes was unsure where his comment was going, and he dried up. "We don't soil the nest," Gagara replied. "Harpy-town stinks enough as it is, thanks to the streets to the north and south of us being lined with crows' cages." "And the elves don't mind?" Reyes asked. "They don't get much say in the matter," Gagara replied simply. "They'd do the same to us if they could." Reyes sat down next to Gagara. There was enough room between the crenellations for the 2 of them to sit snugly together. It was here he got his first true glimpse of Harpy-town. There were hundreds, maybe even thousands of huts made of twigs or straw and scattered haphazardly about as if no thought had gone into their placement. Reyes recognised the huts from drawings he had seen in his father's study, but he never thought he would ever actually get to see one, let alone this many. Unsurprisingly, the huts seemed to vary greatly in size. Some were small, big enough for only 1 or 2 occupants, but some of them, especially in the northern end of the town, were very large, and looked as if they served as some sort of community hall for the huts immediately surrounding. Reyes couldn't help noticing that in the case of the largest of the huts, there always seemed to be a pair of girls standing guard, armed with spears. "So this is Harpy-town?" Reyes asked. It is, Gagara replied, though, to be honest, the name is really something given to us by the elves. We never really bothered to find a name for it ourselves. Reyes watched amazed, drinking in the atmosphere and the architecture. Between the huts were a lot of very flimsy-looking wooden towers. The towers were of a simple design. There was no flat platform for the harpy to look out from, just a set of 4 rails that could be perched upon. And there were no steps leading to the top of the tower, and no cover, so a harpy at the top of one of those towers was very exposed. Yet nearly every tower had at least one occupant, and some even had 2 or 3. The 2 harpies perching at the top of the nearest tower seemed to be pointing directly at Reyes and Gagara and discussing something. Reyes couldn't hear them. He was just too far away. It was like an alien world to Reyes. Harpies lived so differently than humans or even elves, and there was just so much to see. The children practicing with their bows in front of a row of targets wasn't unusual in any town or city. But what was the purpose of the large piece of waste ground that seemed to be located just behind the most southern target range that Reyes could see? There was a large pile of wood gathered right in the very centre of the area. "What is that?" Reyes asked. Gagara looked for a moment until she saw what Reyes was alluding to. "Bonfire," she told him. "We have some nasty winters in Golespon. The huts aren't that well insulated. Every year we gather around the bonfire. Sometimes we huddle in each other's arms for added warmth. It'll be winter soon. It'll be nice to have a male to snuggle with." "So everyone stays together around the bonfire," Reyes confirmed more to himself than anything. "We will be sleeping under the stars," Gagara explained. "It beats dying from the cold. It was so cold one winter about 7 years ago that the city lost about 1/10 of its population to the weather." Reyes shivered. It was cold today, and he could well imagine that it would get even colder yet. "Don't worry," Gagara added, possibly misinterpreting the shiver. "Those who live in villages won't be sharing our bonfire. They'll have their own." "Village harpies?" Reyes commented warily. "Like those that attacked me this morning?" "Every harpy in the city, other than those serving with the Hope or the Raiders, live here in Harpy-town. Over there," she pointed to the north end of the area, "there are something like 60 villages, complete with males, huntresses, the old, the infirm, and children. The old and the young will possibly leave you alone, but the huntresses are all vying for the attention of their male, and might try to kill you the first chance they get." "Everyone?" Reyes asked. "Well," Gagara commented, standing up and taking his arms in her hands, "there may be exceptions. If a village isn't getting on well with their male, they might even ask you to come and replace him. However, such a request might just as easily be a trap, so always be careful." "Oh, everyone is out to get me because I was born male," Reyes summed up. "Pretty much," Gagara replied. Reyes sighed loudly. "Don't worry," Gagara said. "The eyes in the sky keep a careful watch on everything that happens in the city. A girl would need to be pretty certain that she could get away with it before she tried to kill you. It's unlikely anyone will try anything while you are in the city." Reyes felt a great deal of relief at the statement at first. Then the implications of what she had said got through to him. "Eyes in the sky?" Gagara nodded. "You must have heard of them. Golespon is famous for them. They police the streets for us. If someone attacks another without good reason, then the assailant is teleported to the arena." "The arena?" Reyes asked. "I love the arena," Gagara commented dreamily. "Maybe we should visit it tomorrow. All those rippling muscles and those well-oiled bodies. All that blood and excitement." She licked her lips. "All prisoners go to the arena?" Reyes asked. "At first," Gagara told him. "Those that operate the arena get first pick. They have to feed the meat grinder, you know. Those who are considered unsuitable for the arena are put in the cages, or occasionally burnt at the stake in one of the markets for the entertainment of the shopping crowds." Gagara seemed to be in a world of her own as she described the arena setup. The newcomers are placed into what is known as the Green Division. They fight in mass battles on the 3rd day of each week in order to whittle out those that have some skill from those who don't. There's no point in trying to train someone who is going to die the moment she enters the arena. After that, they try to match experience to experience, so as to make for some decent bouts. Reyes did his best not to listen too closely. He didn't really want to know about the blood and gore of the arena. At the same time, he had developed feelings for Gagara that made him hesitate to stop her talking about the subject. I once saw a man decapitate another in the arena with his first blow. So much for the two of them being evenly matched, Gagara was saying. My favourite fighter at the moment has to be Skeeg. He's an ogre with 17 kills under his belt, 3 or so more, and he might attract the attention of... Will I be safe in Harpy-town? Reyes asked suddenly, partly because he wanted to change the subject. I'm not sure I can live in a place where everyone is out to kill me. Maybe I should find a hotel elsewhere in the city. Gagara climbed to her feet and offered Reyes her hand. Reyes took her hand and climbed back to his feet. They were still screaming at him. He was half tempted to sit right back down again. There isn't a hotel in the city that would accept you as a guest, Gagara told him. She seemed to be gazing deeply at him. He could so easily lose himself in those beautiful eyes. Not one? Reyes asked. There was only the merest hint of scepticism in his voice, tempered by the feelings he had for the harpy in front of him. The elves want all their harpies in one place. The only exception are those that have joined the Hope, Gagara explained. However, just because it's not safe for you to go anywhere near any of the villages, doesn't mean you'll have the same trouble at the other end of town. Reyes glanced over the wall at the southern end of Harpy-town. This half? It's hardly a half, Gagara commented. But yes, all harpies that are either fed up with living the village life, or those who have been rejected by their village, for whatever reason, live in what we'd like to refer to as the free section of Harpy-town. Chances are they won't welcome you with open arms. Not at first, anyway. Being male, you represent a potential return to a way of life they despise. On the other hand, they aren't likely to kill you as soon as they look at you. Reyes studied the southern side of the settlement. In a way, it was hard to tell where the huts of the villages ended, and the huts of the free harpies began. There was a small wooden fence angling its way between some of the huts, and Reyes wondered if that was some clue. The free part of Harpy-town looked pretty much the same as the rest of the settlement. True, there was no sign of any large community hall, and no spear-wielding guards, but otherwise it was hard to tell the difference. Sometimes I like to sit up here on the wall, or on top of one of the towers, and just watch the world go by, Gagara explained. It's a lovely view, Reyes admitted. You can nearly see all of Harpy-town. Gagara nodded. Come on, let's get you some food. I'll wait for you by the gate. With that, Gagara jumped off of the top of the wall. She fell for only a fraction of a second before she deployed her wings. From then on, her descent was easy as she glided gracefully to the ground. Reyes watched her for a moment. She was so beautiful. She was definitely a creature of the air. He was so happy he had found her. In a way, she helped him to forget the life he had left behind. He couldn't imagine he would ever have been happy with a human girl. There seemed to be no way off the wall other than the way he had come. There was no ladder or makeshift stairs. Harpies simply didn't need them, and no one else had a reason to build them. Reyes returned to the steps he had used to reach the top of the wall and began the long climb down. He felt on his guard the whole way, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. Now, when he was so close to feeling safe, was when he felt a village harpy might find him and strike. He stayed on his guard, even as he was passing through the gate and into Harpy-town itself. There was a sort of esoteric feeling about the place, as if he was moving from one reality to another simply by passing under a brickwork arch. The ground felt firmer, the air smelled fresher, and the attitude of the local population seemed to be vastly different. Gagara was waiting just as she had promised. She pounced on him almost instantly as he stepped into the town and grabbed his arm in her hand. You need to stay close by me. Sorry? Reyes asked. Officially, the gates are outside the purview of any of the villages and are free for all to use. The villages nearest the gates, though, sometimes act as if the gates belong to them. They keep a careful eye on everything and everyone that passes through them. It's best if no one watching thinks you are unaccompanied. I see, Reyes commented unsure. Come on, let's get something to eat, Gagara added. Walking through the streets of Harpy-town was hard enough at the best of times. Reyes stood out simply because he wasn't flying. Added to the fact that he was male, he seemed to pick up a small entourage of girls who couldn't take their eyes off him. You have to make allowances, Gagara told him. There are a lot of girls here who have never seen a male before. I had never seen a male before I met you. I need to get a skirt, Reyes commented. And spy on my fun? Gagara responded. Then she added, You're right, a skirt would help to hide you, although the shape of your wings would still mark you out as a male. Reyes tried his best not to feel too self-conscious about the attention he was getting, but it didn't help when some of those who saw him made quite disparaging remarks about his presence. What's she doing here? She better not be here to recruit. I've had enough of village life. Pah! Freeloading male. Go back to your village. Then there were other comments. Hey, Gagara, can I have her when you're finished? I could use a male to warm my bed. Don't be greedy by keeping that male to yourself. Food in Harpy-town was served from one of the massive fire pits. Each of the villages in Harpy-town had access to their own fire pits. Those that lived free of village life were no exception. The fire pit that Reyes and Gagara approached was under the control of 3 elderly-looking harpies. 2 of them were clearly in their early to mid-30s. The third looked as if she was only in her early 20s. But she bore a large gaping hole in her left wing that must have made flying difficult, if not impossible. If these 3 had stayed in their respective villages, it was a high chance they would have been killed a long time ago. Also with the 3 were 20 or so very young girls. Although young, several of them looked to be older than Reyes or Gagara, and some even looked old enough to be practicing their hunting skills for the day of their rite of passage. Others looked so young that it was hard for Reyes to believe that they even knew how to walk properly, let alone cook. It was these girls who were cooking the meat. As Reyes and Gagara reached the fire pit, the young girls cooking the food all began to look at him and giggle. For a moment Reyes felt overcome with the desire to cover himself. He resisted the urge, certain that it would make him seem even stranger to these young harpies. The harpy with the hole in her wing stepped between Gagara, Reyes, and the cooking meat. Who is this? She demanded. She's mine, Gagara replied defiantly. I don't spend my days cooking so some male can come in and help herself. What can she offer in exchange? Reyes felt lost. The harpy with the hole in her wing was talking far too quickly for him to be able to make out any more than the occasional word. He glanced at Gagara, feeling helpless. She can make herself useful, Gagara replied. I'm sure, the cook commented. I can imagine what use you have for her, but what use is she to the community as a whole? Lingwalt, one of the elderly harpies at the fire pit, came over to see what the fuss was all about. It is not for us to decide who does and does not get to eat. I'm sure we can find a job for her. Remember, we found a job for you when you escaped from your village because of your injury. Lingwalt looked angry for a moment at having been interrupted. Then she seemed to think better of pressing the matter further, and returned to her supervising duties. Henfin, you old hag, Gagara commented happily. You're looking good today. Gagara! Reyes was utterly shocked. If he had understood what had just happened as clearly as he thought he did, this harpy had just jumped to his defence, and now Gagara was insulting her. You too, you dreary sow, Henfin replied. I see you've gotten yourself a male. No need to guess what you're planning for tonight. Maybe, maybe not, Gagara agreed happily. Right now we're hungry. Of course, you vile young egg-sucker. Help yourself, Henfin told her brightly. Thank you, you foul-smelling tramp, Gagara responded. There were 5 different beasts to choose from. Reyes saw with relief that all 5 of the beasts on offer had 4 legs. Knowing what he did about the harpy diet, he had been worried that human or even elf might have been on the menu. Gagara showed him how to serve himself. She approached the creature that looked like it might have been a cow in life, and ripped off a large chunk of flesh using her claws to slice easily through the meat. She handed the first chunk to Reyes, and then took a second for herself. Why do you... and... He had forgotten her name already, so he pointed towards the harpy they had just been speaking to. Henfin? Gagara asked. Reyes nodded and continued. Why do you and Henfin talk to each other like that? Like what? Gagara bit into the meat. Hag? Sow? Egg? Egg-sucker? Gagara commented. It's just a game we play. Henfin is a good friend. It's just a shame that her mind is beginning to go. It's not bad yet, but I feel the worst. She's quite old, you know. I mean, Egg sucker? What sort of insult is that? Reyes grinned and nodded. He took a bite of the meat and was relieved to find that it did indeed taste like cow. I'll admit, I was worried that elf or goblin may have been on the menu. Gagara shook her head and, misinterpreting Mace's intent, said, I'm sorry you're disappointed. Unfortunately, as we live in an elven city, we try to avoid doing anything that might upset our elven hosts, such as cooking the local population. Besides, I've heard that goblin is very rubbery and not very appetizing. So you've not tried it? Reyes asked. I've lived in the city my entire life, Gagara pointed out. I'd like to try elf sometime, though. I've heard the meat is rich and sweet. Reyes shivered at the thought. Oh, you're cold, Gagara commented. You poor thing. Come on, let's see if we can warm you up back at my hut. Gagara's hut was one of the smallest huts in the area. It was big enough inside for 2 harpies to sleep side by side, but there wasn't much other room. It was made of packed dried grass and twigs woven together to make the place feel quite sturdy, although it looked very flimsy from the outside. Gagara entered the hut first. The entrance was low, and she had to get down on her hands and knees to crawl into the hut. Reyes had heard of this sort of thing before from his father's books. Apparently, when man had just started to build stone huts, the doors were built this way. It meant that a potential attacker entering through the door would be at the mercy of those inside the building for several seconds. They had been stone buildings, though. Surely it would be easier for any attacker to just burn down this hut. Once Reyes had followed Gagara into the hut, he found nothing more than a strip of cloth to cover the entrance, offering only a modicum of privacy to the inhabitants. Gagara was on her feet at the far side of the hut, lighting an oil lamp. She attached it to the side of the hut in a way that Reyes felt didn't look all that safe. At least it afforded some light in the hut, but it did look perilously close to the dry grass that made up that side of the hut. Reyes also climbed to his feet. He was by no means all that tall, even by harpy standards, and yet the ceiling of the hut brushed against the tips of his wings. It was actually a pleasant surprise when he realized he could feel it. It was small inside as well. Despite being a 2-harpy hut, there was barely enough room for both Reyes and Gagara to lay side by side, and yet there was something cosy about the place. The bed of straw that lay at his feet could in no way be as comfortable to sleep on as his bed back at the castle had been, and yet there was a feeling permeating his entire body that this was where he belonged. You should leave your pretty sword and armbands here, Gagara told him. They'll be quite safe in the hut. If you keep wearing them out in the city, sooner or later someone is going to take a shine to them, and eye in the sky, or no eye in the sky, they'll try and take them off you. Reyes felt doubtful as to the truth of how safe they'd be, as there was no lock on the door. Nevertheless, he didn't want to insult Gagara by not doing what she suggested. He unhooked his belt and placed it and all its contents against the wall furthest from the door. He also left his bow there and removed the bracelets, leaving everything in a small, neat pile. Feeling even more naked than when he had first entered the hut, Reyes stepped over to join Gagara. She was now kneeling by a small jewellery box and glancing at the contents. It was clear she wanted to show them off, but she acted nervous as she handed the box to Reyes, as if she thought that he might abscond with the box and its contents. These are my pretties, she told him. Reyes glanced at the box. It was filled with a number of small, worthless stones that looked as if they had been polished to a high sheen. Some harpies valued such stones so highly. Reyes could well believe that there might be an entire elven industry dedicated to polishing such stones in order to get the harpies to do what they wanted at a relatively cheap price. Reyes couldn't help thinking that although they were very pretty stones, there was nothing in the box of any real value. They are pretty, Reyes declared, but not as pretty as you. Gagara rewarded his words with a very cute smile. She closed the box and tucked it away under a small covering of straw. Reyes gazed deeply into her eyes. And I'm very glad you're with me. Reyes was definitely falling in love with Gagara. Gagara rewarded him with another cute smile and leaned in close. She then bit Reyes hard on the end of his nose. I'm glad too. Reyes's nose hurt. At first he thought Gagara was attacking him, but with the pain came an explosion of sensuality that he had never bargained for. It felt as if every nerve ending in his body had come to life at once. "I can tell you like me," Gagara told him gently. "The way you've been checking me out whenever you thought I wasn't looking. The way your body reacts whenever I so much as smile at you." She leaned in as if she was about to whisper something to him, but she bit him on the ear instead. Reyes wrapped his arms around Gagara as tightly as he could. Only her wings were stopping him from holding her even closer. Then he leaned in fully with the intent of kissing her. Instead, he grabbed her nose tightly in his jaws and bit down until he could taste blood. "Ow!" she whimpered. He let go quickly. "I'm sorry," he said. The shock of what he had done terrified him. He moved away from her quickly, scared of hurting her further. "It's okay," she replied reassuringly. She approached him slowly and took him in her arms again. Then she leaned towards his other ear in much the same fashion as she had the first time, just before she'd sunk her teeth in. But this time she said, "It's what I want."